Well, welcome everybody to this panel meeting for growth, infrastructure and planning. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Council will be holding this meeting electronically. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the Council's website for them to do so. Members of the Council are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphones off once they have finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish. If you experience connection or other technical issues, it may help to switch your camera off. Cameras should be switched on if and when speaking in the meeting. To indicate a wish to speak, members should use the raise hand function. Use of the meeting chat function is exclusively for voting. At the end of the debate, on each item of business, there will be a vote. Members should vote using the chat function by indicating for, against or abstain. I will declare the result after each vote. Breaks of at least 15 minutes will be held every 2 hours if we need it, and will be taken after the speaker in the debate has finished speaking. If we are voting, the vote will be concluded before the break is taken. Other breaks will be incorporated as appropriate. Members should be conscious that this meeting is being live streamed. Members of the press and public may be watching, so please turn off your phones. So membership of this panel today, myself, Stephen Bolton, as chairman, Lewis Cocking, Jonathan Kay as vice chairman, Asif Khan, Adam Mitchell, Rena Ranger, Sarah Talon, Nigel Taylor, Sandy Walkington, Paul Zukowski, and we have Colette White-Lowe, who is substituting for Annie Brewster. So apologies then from Annie Brewster. Members' interest. If you consider you have a disclosable pecuniary interest in any matter to be considered at the meeting, you must declare that interest and must not participate in or vote on that matter unless a dispensation has been granted by the Standards Committee. If you consider you have a declarable interest as defined in paragraph 5.3 of the Code of Conduct for Members in any matter to be considered at the meeting, they must declare the existence and nature of that interest. If a member has a declarable interest, they should consider whether they should participate in consideration and vote on the matter. So minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of September. Are we content to accept those?
Stephen, I did actually raise my hand on the item.
Yes.
I'm wondering, given the relationships between local planning authorities and the county council enshrined within particularly item 4, whether we members who are also members at other places or the local planning authority should be declaring an interest. And I just wanted to, I mean, that will apply to, I would think, quite a number of people on the panel. But I do wonder whether we needed some guidance as to whether we need to actually declare that interest or whether it can be viewed as a broad-brush dispensation in this instance.
Good question. Well, for this meeting, we can declare an interest, and I will do so as being a member of Cabinet dealing with planning on Welland Hatfield Council. And Paul, you declare an interest in the same way, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed that before. Right, so on the minutes, are you happy to accept them?
In fact, I've got a couple of questions on the minute.
Right, okay.
Stephen. Sorry to remain with my hand up. The first is just a question. It's not questioning the accuracy of the minutes, because I have gone and looked at the video and they do reflect accurately what was said in the meeting. It was just to a little bit of a query, really, for yourself on the item on the LEP update, which was cancelled. And as I say, the minutes reflect quite accurately what you said, which was that it was cancelled due to lack of business. But I'm not sure that that's the whole story, and I wondered whether you might want to review whether we revisit that, because it seems extraordinary to me in the post-COVID situation we're in and the disruptions that we're seeing that actually the LEP had nothing to say at that point. And that seems a little bit unusual. And I'm not entirely sure it reflects what officers had said to me about the situation in the pre-meeting briefing. So I just wondered whether you wanted an opportunity to kind of say something about that. The second thing that I wanted to raise was more of a general question about the panel, really. And it neither that meeting nor this meeting had any report back from the growth board. And I'm just wondering about how that relationship between the growth board and this growth panel works, because it would appear we're not receiving report back, for example, from the chair of the growth board as to what's happening in the growth agenda to this panel. And that was kind of what I understood would be happening going forward. So I just wanted to raise those two questions, Stephen.
Okay. I think as questions, Paul, rather than minute matters, I'll take those away, okay, rather than I'll answer them today. But I'll just deal with the accuracy of the minutes for the moment.
Chair, that they were accurate.
Yes, yeah. Okay. So any other hands?
Yes, Stephen, it's just to say that I'm a councillor at Stevenage Borough Council as well, if we're all declaring that, dual hatters. Okay,
thank you, Adam. And Lewis?
Thank you, Chairman. The same as what Adam's just said.
Right.
I'm a councillor at Broxbourne. Can we just record that as well, please? Thank you, Chairman.
And Colette?
Same. I'm on Decorum, a member of Decorum Borough Council. I also sit on the Development Control, which is the planning committee for Decorum. Thank you.
Thank you. And Rena?
Thank you, Chair. I'm also a councillor at Three Rivers District Council. Do you want the committees I sit on? I'm a substitute for planning, and I sit on IHED, which is infrastructure, housing and economic development.
Okay, thank you. Nigel?
I'm a member of Decorum Borough Council and Berkhamsted Town Council, and I'm a substitute on the Planning Committee of Decorum Council, and I'm a member of the Scrutiny Committee responsible for planning.
Thank you. Jonathan?
I'm a cabinet member at East Herts Council, although I'm not on Development Management Committee.
Thank you. I see if your hand is up still.
It is. I know that the outcome is just to note. There's no actual decision that's to be made about that, but I will let people know that I'm also a borough councillor at Watford. But I think some of these things could have been done outside the meeting.
Yes, thank you. And Sandy?
Yeah, I just want to apologise because clearly I'm totally idle because I'm simply a single hatter. So I feel very honoured to be with this other distinguished members of this panel.
Okay, thank you. I think what we'll do is before the next meeting, I'll take advice on this. And I don't think we're going to need to declare every time that we sit on boroughs and districts and planning, but I'll take advice on that. Okay, thank you. So the minutes are accepted. Public petitions, we have not received any. So item 3 is the risk focus report on infrastructure funding, and Colin Haig will take us through this.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, councillors. This is a report that was requested by the Audit Committee a couple of weeks ago. We hold a corporate risk related to infrastructure funding. So as you can imagine, the county is looking to build 100,000 houses, create 100,000 jobs over the next 15-year-ish plan period. And for that reason, we recognise there is a lot of associated infrastructure that will be needed. All types of infrastructure, roads, public transport, schools, healthcare, utilities, community centres, all of that goes into the pot. And at the moment, we have that risk identified as severe, and there was a desire from the Audit Committee to see if it could be reduced to significant. And what the report sets out is all of the different actions that we are taking as a council, working with our district and borough colleagues, working with parish colleagues, working with other partners such as NHS bodies, to try and reduce that risk, to make sure we are securing as much funding for all the different types of infrastructure that we need. And you'll see in the recommendations a list of all the actions that we've got associated against that risk. My ultimate recommendation to the audit panel was that it would be hard to reduce that risk at the moment, partly because we're talking billions of pounds over 10 to 15 years, and we never know what to account for in the future entirely. I also identified that the planning bill that's due this autumn, supposedly, but probably has been delayed by the appointment of a new Secretary of State for Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. The white paper published a couple of years ago talked about changing the infrastructure funding regime and moving to a national infrastructure levy. As a consequence of that, we don't know quite what that will say or when it will say it. So we can't give the reassurance that everyone might like that that will secure us all the funding, but it's certainly talked about a new way of doing it. So in the meantime, we will continue as officers and councillors and this committee to work on all of those recommendations we've got in paragraph 3.1. And my recommendation to the audit committee was that we return to them once the planning bill has been published to set out what the bill says. Their response was, no, actually, we've heard from you that officers and GRIP panel understand this is one of their issues and are watching it closely. And you know that we brought reports to you last month on this issue, and we will bring future reports on infrastructure funding. They were therefore happy that this sits in GRIP Cabinet Panel's remit, and that Stephen Bolton as chair and Jonathan as deputy chair would make sure that the issue is raised on a frequent basis, and that councillors on this committee hold one another to task and officers to task on making sure we're doing all we can to secure infrastructure funding and to work with our partners. So that is the essence of the recommendation, the noting, just to say we will continue to bring you reports on that issue. We will continue to do all we can to make sure that county services are properly funded in line with growth, and that we work with other colleagues and other partners to make sure their statutory functions are funded as best we can as well. And we'll work with government to change policy to secure funding, etc. So that's the essence of the report. Very happy to take any thoughts, any things you would like us to bring to you in the future, and I can then discuss those with the chair. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Colin. Obviously, after the planning bill is published and we know about it, there'll be more to say then. Sandy.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just a comment. I mean, this is yet another massive vulnerability for two-tier authorities, and I think it is an extraordinary situation. I just wondered how we compared with our other peer shire counties, who must all have this same challenge, and whether it's common to all of us or whether there are any peculiar circumstances in Hertfordshire. And then the other question I had, because I may have misunderstood it, but I'm a bit gobsmacked by the 25% default payment to town and parish councils if they have got neighbourhood plans, because I find it quite alarming that there will be lavish funding for dog bins and flower arrangements, and we are left really struggling to fund schools and highways. And I just would like some clarification. Is it really the case that 25% of SIL will go to our very worthy, but nevertheless dealing with nice to do's rather than necessarily have to do bits of spending?
Colin.
Thank you, Councillor. First question, I don't think it is unique in Hertfordshire to other county and district areas. Perhaps the only issue in Hertfordshire at the moment is half of the authorities in the county have community infrastructure levy regimes and the other half do not. So in some cases, we're still only using the Section 106 regime. And in some cases, for the county council, if we wish to bid for funding from the SIL pots that the districts hold, then we go through that process. So there isn't a identical regime throughout the county, and Essex, for example, will probably have examples of that as well. So nothing particularly unique. It is right that town and parish councils get 25% where they have an adopted neighbourhood plan, otherwise it defaults to 15%. We seek to work with them, and districts seek to work with them when they prepare their neighbourhood plans, so they take account of infrastructure. I think the government intent of that was to show that where a community is willing to accept growth, it will secure the benefits of infrastructure investment to see that it's spent very locally rather than being spent further away on a more strategic item, a road or a railway or something like that. That means where a parish council secures money, we would have to work with them and attempt to secure some or all of that if they were willing to spend on whatever strategic infrastructure we felt was appropriate. But yes, the default is right that they secure 25% where it's collected.
Thanks, Colin. And of course, that does affect areas which are unparished because they won't get the 15 or the 25%. With slight imbalance in that, but still. Right. Paul next, please.
Thank you, Stephen. The question that I've got is really quite specific, and but it goes to a much wider concern. And if I take you to page 23 of the pack, we're looking at the risk focus appendix, and specifically ENV 0149/003. Which is one of the control measures on the risk about the growth that was highlighted in the audit report. So the risk control measure states work effectively with our local authority partners to communicate and identify the required infrastructure. And the progress update on that says, new local and strategic plan engagement document was agreed by GRIP panel in June, is now being implemented with borough and district councils. I think there's a little bit of a disjoint and a bit of a concern in there that is encompassed as a more widespread concern about how closely and in partnership we are working with our local authority partners, particularly the planning authority partners, when it comes to housing and majority of planning applications. One of the things that sort of implies is that we come up with a plan as to how we're going to engage with local plans, and we tell the local authorities what it is. And I don't think that's what's implied there, but it's certainly the impression that starts to come across. And I would just like some reassurance and comfort that actually we're working very closely together to get this stuff done, rather than being big brother and telling them what they need to do.
No, I don't. I hope that the districts wouldn't say that that is how it works. That engagement document was prepared in partnership with the districts to make sure that everyone was happy and could sign up to it. As officer level and at councillor level, we have regular meetings with district councils as they are preparing their local plans. We work together on all of the aspects of that, where there is a county focus on education need arising from development targets, on highways and transport modelling and public transport issues. There is ebb and flow as districts are identifying their targets and identifying potential sites as to what will work individually and cumulatively. We then submit comments to local plans. We will often prepare statements of common ground or memorandum of understanding as to how we're going to work together where there are challenging issues arising from site selection and target selection. We then comment at planning application stage and work at pre-application stage. So I hope nobody would say it is a big brother relationship, and that both parties enter into it recognising they have statutory duties that overlap and underlap, and we try and work together to find whatever the best solution may be. And to some extent it's led by the districts, who are the local planning authority, who have the statutory duty to decide what their housing target is and to select sites, and we hopefully provide useful information into that process where there are county issues that need to be taken into account. There will inevitably be tensions. The planning system is quite a tense process to get the right answers to engage with the community and developers and all other partners. But I hope we have spent a number of years with the growth and infrastructure team building as good relationships as it's been possible to build with all of the districts and other partners.
Thank you for that. I'm sure in your former career that you understand where that question was coming from.
Yes, and it recognises there are tensions. There will be times we disagree, but it's that good officer and councillor working relationship, the ability to pick up a phone and solve an issue and chat, that we've worked hard on to make sure that the professional issues can be dealt with in a mature way.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Lewis.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It was just a clarification question, Colin. Thank you for the detailed report and introducing it. It was just that when we get updates on this report moving forward, could we have specific updates on how we're working with the NHS? Because I was a bit concerned in this report, the NHS is such a strategic partner. It was kind of lumped in with other partners, and I think it's so important we get specific updates on that, because I think all of us will hear concerns from our residents about new GP surgeries and what have you. So it was just a plea for that, but thank you for taking us through the report.
That's right. No, it's a good point. Other councillors have raised it as well. They recognise the importance of the NHS in terms of creating decent communities and tackling some of the health issues arising out of COVID. So we will look at an update or a report that says what we're doing with the NHS, how we try to work as well with them as we can.
Okay, thank you. Asif.
Thank you. I do welcome this type of scrutiny. I think it's important. Residents often complain to us when, as councillors and as representatives, that when big builds have been authorised, I can talk about in Watford, for example, the infrastructure is not there. Why haven't the developers been given that infrastructure? So this actually gives that scrutiny, that important scrutiny, from a member perspective, that and we can ask those questions about why the infrastructure isn't there for a lot of those builds, which are going up in Watford as an example, and the role there. I think that's so important with confidence from the public, and I think that's just where we've got to play. And also, I think districts do need to realise that it's not always good to approve things when the infrastructure hasn't been done, that hasn't been given. So the report, I think in our last meeting, of the £1.3 billion gap between what developers are offering and what's actually needed by what the county council thinks. I think that's also important, that developers know that they need to also get that infrastructure monies back in to plans as well. So it's a good tool to use to show the transparency of the process, and also for us to scrutinise as elected members.
Okay, thank you. Nigel.
Thank you. I wish to sort of raise the point that when Dacorum published its local plan, what it was proposing for my division had no provision whatsoever for the transport infrastructure that would be required to support those houses. And I could see no way that it could be retrofitted had they adopted such a plan. So I would suggest this is not a risk, it's an issue. It's actually happening at the moment, that districts are not doing anything worthy of the name in terms of planning for this infrastructure. And it's the major objection that I had to that plan at the time, although the healthcare and the schools were a separate issue that also affects county.
Yeah.
Okay, noted. We will engage with Decorum on that, and I won't talk about the specifics. I don't know the answer to that one, but noted. Thank you, Councillor.
I would appreciate it if you could keep me informed, because I'm perplexed as to how we may do it. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you. Rena is next.
Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me. What Councillor Khan has just said has just got me thinking about infrastructure and whether we would need to look at that a little bit differently with some of the kind of development we've seen, especially in Watford, where they're very, very tall towers. And will the way we deliver, the report mentions libraries, doctors' services and stuff like that, in a different way? Because if you have a 30-storey tower, is it that we look at infrastructure not always outside that build, or have some requirement to put some of these things inside that build, if you are following my train of thought?
Yeah, I think you'll give an example where you could have a mixed use development. Certainly, as an example, the County Council's view on the provision of primary schooling has changed in recent years, where you have more urban locations like Watford, and the recognition you can't necessarily have a large single-storey school with a playing field, and perhaps you do have to do things differently in these urban areas. And I know of examples around the county where libraries are being inserted into new buildings, new locations as well. So I think we are recognising those facts. It then becomes negotiation with the developer, with the owner of those buildings, as to whether a premise is available for developments to be inserted in them. So no specific answer on that, but yes, the issue is recognised, and we do seek to find solutions to those issues where we can.
Thank you. I'm just thinking, I had a conversation with somebody who said, at what stage or what height would you be happy to send children downstairs to the local park or something like that by themselves, and at what age? So if it is mixed use, it would mean, you know, infrastructure would also go wider into green spaces, libraries, community centres, recreational areas and stuff like that.
Yeah, considered as part of the planning system, county and districts and developers and communities working together is the way it filters itself out.
Okay, thank you. Then the recommendation is that the report to the Audit Committee recommended the whole list of items. I won't read them all out. You've got them in front of you. So would you just indicate that you are content to accept the recommendation, please, in the chat? Thank you. That is agreed. So the next item, item 4, Hertfordshire leads improving new development in the county. And Sarah McLaughlin is going to tell us about this. Thank you.
Morning, councillors. Just to note before I start, I'm joined today by Lynn Seeney. Lynn's the team leader for the County Council Leeds team, which I'll talk about in a moment. She comes to us with a wealth of experience. She's held senior positions for sustainability at Parsons, Brinkerhoff, WSP and BRE. She's also retained as a sustainable built environment expert by the Design Council and was part of the review team for the MHCLG Design Guide. I thought helpful just to provide a bit of context. Lynn is our subject matter expert in a number of these areas, and we'll be able to help with any specific questions after the report's presented. So the first report this morning is about the Leeds service itself. Until recently, the County Council ecologists, archaeologists, landscape architects sat within a team known as Environmental Resource Management. That team's now moved within the Growth and Infrastructure Unit and has renamed itself as Hertfordshire Leeds. Leeds stands for Landscape, Ecology, Archaeology, Design and Sustainability. We're hoping this enables the team to sit neatly within the growth arena to reflect County Council aspirations on sustainable growth. and further develop a more close working relationship with the Growth and Infrastructure Unit and our district LPA partners. The team is a team of technical specialists. They support our local planning authority partners through service level agreements, which we have already in existence, planning performance agreements, and also advising internal HCC teams on our own development proposals. The team also manages the Building Futures Biennial Awards ceremony, which celebrates innovation, sustainability and good design, and is leading on a Building Futures conference, also scheduled on the same day later this month. Internally and externally, there's an increased emphasis on climate change mitigation, adaptation, carbon reduction. The Environment Act, which intends to introduce biodiversity net gain and local nature recovery strategies, which is the subject of the next report. Also emphasis on placemaking and the important part these technical disciplines contribute to that. And we also have the recently published National Design Guide and National Model Design Code. We feel there's scope to develop the service to meet a demand for technical disciplines that support the planning process. Market shortages in this area of employment mean recruitment is an issue, and the development of a shared service is being proposed. This will continue to support our partners to meet an increased and accelerated demand for new homes. It also means our LPAs and the County Council aren't all fishing in the same pool for resource and staff. The service could support a variety of work. We've outlined this in detail at paragraph 7.3 of the report, which includes preparing briefing notes for new and emerging government policy and guidance, supporting the development of Hertfordshire specific policy and guidance, training, liaison, collaboration, sharing knowledge, and also joint procurement and enabling of the expert client so that our partners can assist in shaping and developing the offer of the team. The cost of the service will need to be discussed with our LPA partners. Some costs can be met through PPAs, pre-app advice. There may be scope to part fund through BNG, which we'll cover in the next report, and to review our existing service level agreements with partners. In order to calculate the amount of resource likely to be required, we'll need to have more detailed discussions with each partner. The programme relies very heavily on each authority advising us about the level of involvement they would require from the team of specialists. The County Council doesn't have a mandatory role in this process, but hope to support partners with a shared service proposal. So the intention of this report is to provide an update for members at this stage of the process so that you're aware of the proposals. Once those conversations have been held, we intend to present to the Hertfordshire Infrastructure Planning Partnership and also speak to our LPAs on a one-to-one basis. We'll intend to report back with further detail. Some of this will be reliant on the enactment of the Environment Bill because we're also waiting for publication of that too. So the recommendation is for the Cabinet panel to note the contents of the report and endorse engagement between the Leeds team and our LPA partners to develop the work we've outlined. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions, I think.
Thank you, Sarah. Sandy had his hand up through the middle of that, so.
Oh, right, sorry.
Yeah, no, I only didn't indicate I wished to ask at the end. I didn't want to interrupt Sarah's magnificent lucubration. I mean, this is interesting. I mean, I've only got a couple of comments. I like the reference to ecology and archaeology apprenticeships, and I hope that that is pursued. And I'm glad, I mean, wearing another hat as someone involved in the St Albans and Hertfordshire Architectural and Archaeological Society, I'm glad that archaeology is there. I know it's not directly about development, but it is something that we just need to hang on to. There's a mention about site visits, and I wasn't sure who that was aimed at, but certainly Stephen's distinguished predecessor, Derek, was very good at organising visits for members of this panel to various exemplar developments of different kinds or works on sustainability of different kinds. And I think that I certainly would. I mean, there's a brief reference to some of the things that Central Beds are doing and so on, and whether there are some useful site visits that would benefit us to see what best practice is, to just get a sense of putting a kind of physical picture to what you've described in the abstract. I think I would find that useful. And then I also just the Building Futures conference. Do we have to stick, I mean, I'd be quite interested in going to that, but do I have to stick my hand in my pocket and pay the £99, or at least go on my hands and knees to my group leader? Or is there some way that members of this panel would be allowed to attend that conference? Because it does seem to me to be highly relevant to this panel's work.
Thank you. I think your point about site visits is a really important one. I think it does help to see things in practice, see how places are shaping up, what's worked, what hasn't worked, to learn from best practice, but also learn from maybe some of the mistakes. I think there's a wealth of opportunities for us, you know, locally to see things within Hertfordshire, but also across boundaries. And also probably it would be beneficial to review some of the sites that are actually up and coming before they even, you know, as we start talking about these sites with our local authority partners, once they've started, you know, they've progressed through the local plan process. Once we start engaging with developers on what these sites will look like, I think it might be useful to do a trip around some of the larger sites to review where they are, how they sit in the current landscape, what are some of the key issues relating to some of those. So that's definitely something we can look into. In terms of
building futures.
Building futures, yes. So the conference was intended to be face-to-face originally, but I think it's fair to say there's a certain amount of concern, I think, for people meeting face-to-face so early after the pandemic. Well, not that it's finished, but I think people are a little bit nervous about it. So the intention is that I think we will try to record it or provide an online event as well, which would be easily accessible. Lynn, I don't know whether you want to comment on that because you're involved in the detail around that.
Thanks, Sarah, and good morning, councillors. Yes, absolutely, you're very welcome to attend, and we will happily give you a free place. There is no problem with that whatsoever. So if anybody would like to go, please let us know. Yes, we are going to provide recordings of the speakers with their consent. I'm just seeking consent at the moment. So if you wish to access particular modules afterwards or particular speakers, we can arrange for that, provided they're given their permission. However, if you come on the day, you do get the opportunity to put direct questions to some of the movers and shakers in the policy agenda. So do feel free to come if you like. Plus the lunch isn't bad.
Good, thank you. I think we will look at having some site visits. I think it's also interesting to look at a site perhaps 5 years old, which was contentious at the time, and then to see whether it has really worked and the fears and worries at the time of planning were unfounded, or whether it really hasn't worked and they were, because, you know, there's a lot of resistance to development generally, and seeing some good sites that have worked despite local opposition could be useful. Anyway, Paul, next, please.
Thank you, Stephen. I also wanted to just clarify on the conference. One of the things that Sandy kind of asked, but I'm not sure was very clear, was who is actually organising it, and I am assuming it's a county council from the answer that you gave. But if you could categorically confirm that it is a HCC event, that would be helpful. I'm also quite interested in coming along because it does seem that it's got some interesting stuff in there that we should perhaps be listening to. So, you know, I just wanted a little bit of confirmation. But can you also just confirm, given what Lynn has just said, there seemed to be a bit of a disjoint. I thought, Sarah, you said that it was potentially moving to online only, but Lynn seemed to indicate that there was attendance and a lunch. So if you could just absolutely categorically clarify how this is being held. Is it dual? Is it only face-to-face? Is it only online? Just a little bit of clarification I'd appreciate on that. And I have a second thing that I'll come back to once I've heard that, if that's okay, Steve.
Yeah, so it is a dual event. So whilst we'd offered it initially as a face-to-face only, I think there was certain concern that people were going to be missing out if they were uncomfortable meeting face-to-face. So as Lynn's pointed out, we're trying to do it in a dual dual approach. So there will be the opportunity to come face to face and network, but also to access the material as well if people feel uncomfortable doing that. In terms of this, so the headline sponsor for the conference is Hertfordshire Building Control, but the HCC Lynn's Leeds team have been organising all the arrangements for the event. So arranging the agenda, speakers. Lynn's used a variety of her contacts and the existing team contacts to pull together a really exemplary list of speakers. So yeah, very much organised within HCC, but we've got a number of external sponsors feeding into that process too.
Okay, lovely. I mean, I'm used to kind of conference structure, and there's a difference between being a sponsor and being an organiser in my personal experience with that. Yeah, thank you. The question that was a much more kind of general one. I suppose it's not really a question; it's an expression of perhaps concern and not disappointment. That's the wrong word, because I very much support the approach that you're taking and the direction that it's going. What I'm concerned about is that the lead local flood authority and expertise in flooding and SUDS isn't included in this, because I know that in the pre-meeting Simon did say that there is some really significant pressure on our ability to deliver as a lead local flood authority in responding to applications, and you know, it really would have been ideal, in my view, were that particular aspect of what the county needs to do to have been included in this particular strategy. Very, very supportive of the strategy. Just wish it was that little bit wider.
Yeah, I think there are discussions ongoing at the County Council around the resourcing for the SUDS team, because I know there are a number of issues with recruitment in that area as well. It's appearing very common across a number of technical disciplines. Actually getting the right number of staff into these roles to support an accelerated delivery programme is ever increasingly challenging. So yeah, I think there are opportunities for that to be maybe looked at as next phase. At the moment, we're concentrating on the team that's moved in to the growth and infrastructure unit, but there's potential scope to expand that. And I, take on board your comments, because the SUDS team do provide a similar kind of service as part of the lead service do, in terms of supporting our local authority partners to develop applications and their local plan work. Thank you, though.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Sarah, the shared service is a good idea and makes a lot of sense in this area. But are there any downsides to it? Are there any conflicts in terms of priorities? And presumably they can be ameliorated by good communications, I suppose, between the county and districts.
Yeah. I think in terms of priorities, I think we rely on our local authority partners really to work with us on what their priorities are and how much engagement they feel they need. I think for every site will be different, and the amount of work that we put into each site will vary depending on the characteristics of that site. Some might be more archaeologically sensitive than ecologically, for instance, or it could be a combination of both. But that's something we need to work on with our local authority partners, I think, in the next few months, to understand where their growth scenarios are coming forward, how sensitive the sites are that they're promoting, and how much input we feel will be needed as part of that process. So priorities are a key point. Something we've already asked our LPA partners to do is to help us triage the amount of requests we get for input as part of the process, because we get consulted at the moment from anything from a household extension to a 2,000 home strategic site. Some household extensions might be actually quite sensitive, but I suppose it's just understanding what the baseline is for the area and helping our authorities to engage in the most effective way to make sure that we're not wasting resources. We've got current SLAs with a number of our LPA partners, but I think this is a good time to review what they look like, the content of those, and that will require a lot of collaboration with those LPAs. Does that answer your question, Jonathan?
Yes, it does. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. No more questions. Then the recommendation is that the panel is invited to note the contents of the report and its relationship to the subsequent report covering biodiversity net gain. And there's a future planned report covering design. Are you all happy to do so? And please, again, note in the chat line. Thank you. Thank you. That is noted. So the next item 5, again by Sarah, is the biodiversity net gain.
Thank you. So this again is an update report, principally to explain what biodiversity net gain is for those councillors that maybe don't have an understanding of that, and how it might develop as an opportunity for the County Council and our partners to work together on delivery. The report provides an overview of BNG, which essentially is a 10% gain in biodiversity, which is measured by changes in biodiversity units. So in effect, for every development site, the number of units is calculated prior to development, and then the site has to offer that total as part of that development plus 10%, which is the gain. The offer requires that BNG is a like-for-like replacement. So where a riverbank is damaged, the compensatory and net gain units must be riverine. There's a table at 5.4 which indicates the process that might evolve with BNG, with the first principle obviously being to avoid developing on the most valuable biodiversity sites in the first place. Then, if that cannot be achieved, the next option would be to minimise damage, mitigate losses on site and deliver as much of BNG on site as possible. The next option would then be to deliver the BNG off site but close to the development. And the final and least favourable option would be to purchase BNG credits, which would mean a fee paid by the applicant to local or national offset banks for future projects elsewhere. This could mean that the offset is provided in Yorkshire, for example, which is absolutely what we would hope to avoid. Local residents accepting development should benefit from the mitigation measures that are identified as part of that development opportunity. And the intention is that BNG sites would be safeguarded for a 30-year period, which may not be sufficient. And there may be questions about what happens at the end of that period too. There are opportunities to greatly improve our local habitats and species through BNG, but there are also risks associated with it. The final option, for instance, might be favourable to an applicant who simply wishes to build out their development site. This might be seen as a convenient option for some to just pay a fee. Developers and or land promoters might seek to provide on other sites they own as well, which might not be in Hertfordshire. Delivery on private land, which has no access or benefit to local people, might also be a risk. Although access to ecological sites brings with it its own issues and risks, people should be able to still benefit from its visual aspects. The Environment Bill also introduces local nature recovery strategies. This could support the process through an identification of priority species and habitats and indicate where there are opportunities for improvements. Several pilot programmes are underway and we're engaging with those pilot authorities. Hertfordshire benefits from a significant wealth of information hosted by the Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust, and the value of local volunteers that support the work cannot be underestimated. There's also a baseline work that's been completed over many years. Most recently, a report is underway by the Hertfordshire Climate Change and Sustainability Partnership, which is relevant and worth noting. From a finance perspective, each BNG unit has a value attached to it. There are options to charge for local offset charges, for monitoring and handling fees. So all of this will need to be considered further as the position of HCC and our partners is clarified further. Some LPAs are already seeking to secure BNG through current planning applications. The lead service, which was the focus of the first report, could help provide a role for BNG by offering a call for sites. You'll recall that as part of local plan processes, our local planning authorities have a call for sites for housing and employment sites, for instance, and a similar process could be undertaken for BNG. The County Council could provide a matchmaking service. So where a developer is looking to really provide a particular habitat, we could help them find alternative locations within Hertfordshire. The team could also help develop projects for strategic interventions, but also, and most importantly, probably a coordinated approach for Hertfordshire would be helpful. So finally, the intention is to report back to this panel once further detail is available and the Environment Bill is enacted. For now, Cabinet panel is invited to note the contents of the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. Good report, very important piece of work. For myself, I think the table at 5.4, there is a huge difference between the first principle and the last one, and buying credits for somewhere some distance away seems a really poor way of going about. But I know that's obviously doing at least harm to the site, if it has to be developed as possible, is the way to go. Adam.
Thank you. Reading the paper, I understand what BNG is, but I'm still not sure about the calculations of it. And I've looked at Natural England's biodiversity metric 3.0, a big black box. You put some numbers in at the front, you get some out at the end. It's not very accessible to your average person. It might be fine for planning officers, etc. So I was just wondering if this is coming back, maybe we could have a bit of a sort of crib sheet of how the scoring works, maybe a worked example or two, just to show us how you know, what sort of results we can expect, and how they're measured. I think that would really make it sort of a bit easier to understand for me, because I understand the basic idea, but it's just the detail. I just can't get my head around it at all.
Absolutely noted. Thank you. We can definitely do that.
Thanks, Sarah. Paul.
Thank you, Stephen. One of the things that I was a little bit surprised at in the report detail was the discussion about access for the neighbouring populace to some of these sites, because particularly some of the most vulnerable and rare habitats that we see in the UK, disturbing and trampling are actually a really significant problem, and actually providing that access can actually seriously undermine the biodiversity net gain thing. One that immediately springs to mind is sand dunes. Sand dunes are incredibly vulnerable to trampling, and if you let people onto them, their biodiversity falls through the floor. And you lose their value. So I'm a little surprised that that's such a strong component of how you've kind of structured it in there. I'm actually very relaxed about some of those sites being really quite restricted in terms of public access, because that's not what we're attempting to do. We're not attempting to get public open space here. It's biodiversity that we're looking to actually achieve. So I just wanted to point out my sort of that feeling of it being a little uncomfortable. But one of the things I wanted to ask about was and the real question that I'm kind of leading up to. I see that there's a real and significant opportunity for HCC to potentially provide some of those biodiversity credits because of the scale of landholding that Hertfordshire has across the county. And I'm wondering whether I recall that the rural estate has relatively recently been reviewed. Was this a component of what was considered for the rural estate going forward? Because I do know that some of the rarer habitats in Hertfordshire, some that may well get damaged, are grasslands, and the conversion of agricultural land to grassland has potentially very significant carbon benefits too. So I just wondered what the relationship was between our emerging understanding of biodiversity net gain and our relationship with our rural estate.
There are a number of internal meetings underway at the moment with our property colleagues on their rural estate management work that's currently underway, as I understand it. I can ask Lynn to come in and comment in a bit further detail on some of the points you've made. I think that would be quite helpful, Lynn, if you're able.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sarah. Councillor, just to take you through the rural estates first of all. Yes, indeed, we're having conversations with them at the moment about the review of their land, and the Commission has been to their consultants to look at what the land might best support. So that is not will it support development, it's would it support carbon sequestration, would it support biodiversity net gain, would it best support development. So they're in the mix, which is what biodiversity net gain I think is aiming for, that biodiversity has a value as well as development having a value. So it's a really important step forward, and I think it's fair to say that our rural estates colleagues are grappling with this in the same way that private landowners are, and sort of changing some of their models to accommodate this potential source of income. So it's a really interesting time. I take your point and I agree. I think we've got some really interesting land. We support a number of local wildlife sites on our estate, and it's really important to look at that. But I've been, to be honest, the co-working between the sustainability team, my team and rural estates is growing and growing, and I'm quite heartened by it as a new starter at HCC. It's pleasing to find doors that swing open rather than get shut. So that's really positive. Your point about the public access is well made, and I'm sorry if the report overemphasised the public access, but if I can perhaps explain a little there. If you imagine a graph that looks like that, at this end you've got the sites that need to be totally protected for biodiversity, and you chose sand dunes. That's a good example. Also, I would pick probably ancient woodland, ground nesting birds, etc., that we have a number of in Hertfordshire. It's critical there that you don't have a dog walker or a football go through the middle of a nest, or destroying the seedlings. Absolutely critical. However, at the other end, we've got local authorities where there's quite severe nature deprivation. If you map the distance that residents have to travel before they get to an eco-diverse site, and this is by no means all the sites that we'd be looking for under BNG. But we would be looking for things like the ability to put unmown strips around the edge of playing fields, to look at how we could use the landscaping around developments so that could have an ecological value as well as a decorative value. So that's what I mean by structuring it so that the BNG doesn't all go off somewhere else to create something beautiful in the back garden of someone who already lives in a lovely rural area. It's also making sure that BNG benefits those living in an urban environment, and finding the right balance. And I think, as I say, I think the slope will be something like this. Those sites are completely ecology. Those sites need to be more accessible to people. But you raise a good point. I think that's really important. The other strategy which we are working with is the green infrastructure strategy being produced by John Tiley's team. And that is very much about mapping the distance that people have to travel to get to particular facilities, and looking at the provision of different types of green and blue infrastructure. So by the time we're ready to do our local nature recovery strategy, we should have the biodiversity baseline that's coming through from the sustainability team, i.e. in broad terms, what's out there. We'll know spatially which populations, human populations, are struggling for access to quality green space or recreational space and such like. And we've also got the data from Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust, who I'm pleased to say I've got a very positive relationship with the chief executive there. And there's a lot of data there that we'll be able to use that tells us where the species are. Because if you look at BNG talks about the type of habitat you've got, i.e. the green stuff. What's the species going to live on? And a lot of the data we've had before, and a lot of the emphasis before, has been on species, great crested newts, for example. And this seems to me to be a very interesting effort to marry the two together. I'm sorry if I'm boring anyone, but as you might tell, I think this is really interesting and it's got a lot of potential for the county, and I'm going to be quiet now.
Thanks, Lynn. Lewis next. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah. So I was just kind of coming back on that. I mean, one of the things that I think we need to be very cognizant of is actually some of the rarest species in the UK are actually found on derelict urban sites. And you know, when we're talking about biodiversity, it doesn't just mean open green fields. That's not what we should be looking at. So you know, I fully take on board the idea that, you know, that those ecological sort of sections within urban areas. One of the things that we I think should value in this sort of term is that those green strips that you were talking about that connect the sites together as well, and those should have really significant value in this too. But when coming back to the kind of fundamental bit, we're currently renting farms to farmers for a tenancy cost. But if what we can do is secure payment like that from a developer for the next 30 years, for that land to be held in stewardship for biodiversity net gain, actually, I think that's something that is a different business model that really ought to be pushed reasonably hard within the rural estate, and I do think we need to be looking at that. So thank you for having those discussions. I'll be really interested to see what comes out of them.
Thanks, Paul. And of course, as they say, every little helps. On the scrappy bit of green outside Welland Hatfield offices this summer, there was a very nice orchid growing. So every little bit helps. Right, Lewis next.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, the last report we discussed was improving new development in Hertfordshire, and this report in front of us this morning, does exactly that. I fully support it. I mean, I'm a geographer by trade, so I fully support everything we're trying to do in this report. I mean, my only inkling or concern about this, I would like the sites that are going to be these biodiversity net gains, what have you, to be as close as those developments as possible, because then local residents, like you, Chairman, local residents are going to be able to go around them and look around them. And I mean, we've had some concerns around, should we open up sites to the public, should we not, what are the risks and benefits of that? And I get you're not going to be able to do that in every case, but my view is if we allow the public to learn about nature and learn about biodiversity, they're more likely to understand and protect it. But look, this is fantastic work we're doing, and I fully support the report in front of us today.
Good, thank you. Rena?
Chair, apologies. I think this is about biodiversity net gain in planning applications. I think we'd veered down to what HCC are doing. So just to bring it back to the planning applications and individuals, I'm noting at 6.8 and 6.9, there is a 30-year kind of ring fencing on that. In those 30 years, whose responsibility and at whose cost is it to maintain that biodiverse environment and to make sure it is thriving and not left to just become derelict? Which, not derelict in terms of new biodiversity, but just derelict as sad and not fulfilling its purpose.
I think we're still waiting for the details to be confirmed through the enactment of the bill, but I think Lynn can give you a very good idea of where we think it's headed. Lynn, if you want to comment on that.
Sure. Councillor, the proposal is that during the 30 years, the covenant that the developer provides will provide for the maintenance and management of that biodiversity. And I believe as it stands at the moment, we as councils, LPAs, have to assure ourselves that the BNG is being conserved, let's say conserved rather than preserved. Where it's going to get interesting is some of the biodiversity that we need in the county is squishy and ugly and horrible, and is things like gnats and food for birds. So some of the biodiversity that we create may not be cuddly and photogenic and Instagrammable. So it's going to be quite interesting helping residents understand that too has a value and a purpose.
Yes, so we look forward to more information on gnats and spiders and grass snakes. Yes.
I will provide that, sir.
Okay, thank you. No more questions then. The recommendation is that we note the contents of the paper, and again, would you show in the chat box, please? Thank you. That's agreed. That's the last item for today. Note, please, the next meeting will be on the 30th of November, which I assume will be at 10 AM again. So thank you for your attendance, and we can Now go and have a quick cup of coffee. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye, everybody.
Right.
Thank you.